Seoul was still pretending to be normal when the first man began eating another man's face. Minjae stood on the third floor of a condemned logistics center, one hand pressed against a concrete pillar while he compared a crack in the wall with an old structural plan. Outside, morning traffic crawled through the industrial district. A bus stopped in the middle of an intersection. A delivery van struck its rear and spun into a row of parked cars. The driver climbed out, bleeding from his forehead. A woman in office clothes ran toward him. For 1 second, Minjae thought she was trying to help. Then she pulled him down and bit into his cheek. Every phone in the building sounded at once. Emergency alert. Unknown violent incidents across Seoul. Citizens were ordered to remain indoors and avoid physical contact with the injured. The message ended before the screaming below did. A pale blue window appeared in front of Minjae's eyes. Civilization survival system activated. Extinction level biological disaster confirmed. Choose your first shelter. Time remaining, 59 seconds. A map spread across his vision. 3 buildings glowed within a 5-kilometer radius. The first was a shopping mall. Food reserves, Grade A. Medical supplies, Grade B. Defensive value, Grade D. Human density, Grade S. Estimated time until collapse, 2 hours and 14 minutes. The second was a fire station. Tools, Grade A. Vehicles, Grade B. Defensive value, Grade B. Infection probability, 82%. Unknown threats, 3. The third was the building beneath his feet. Abandoned logistics center. Food reserves, Grade C. Defensive value, Grade B. Underground water reservoir detected. Expansion potential, Grade S. Current registered residents, 0. Predicted survival rate, undetermined. The system marked the shopping mall as the recommended choice. Minjae looked through the dirty window. Apartment towers surrounded the mall. Hundreds of people were already running toward it. Cars blocked both roads leading to the entrance. A crowd would reach the food first, and the infected would follow the crowd. The logistics center had loading bays, steel shutters, rooftop access, a fenced vehicle yard, and walls built to carry stacked freight. The place had been scheduled for demolition because the company no longer needed it, not because the structure had failed. Food could be found. New walls could not. He selected the logistics center. You have chosen a low-resource location. Confirm decision. Minjae confirmed. Shelter 0 created. Administrator, Kang Minjae. Population, 1. Emergency gate control unlocked. Somewhere below, old machinery groaned. The main loading gate began to descend. A woman in blood-soaked medical scrubs sprinted across the yard. A mass of infected spilled around the corner behind her. Some stumbled. Others ran with their heads tilted forward, mouths open, red veins spreading around their eyes. The woman saw the gate lowering and raised both hands. Please, this is not my blood. The system framed her body in blue light. Potential resident detected. Name, Yoon Seoa. Occupation, emergency department nurse. Medical skill, Grade A. Estimated infection probability, 4.7%. Estimated violence probability within 30 days, 11.2%. Emergency resident count will increase to 2. Basic infirmary and quarantine functions will become available. The gate was less than a meter from the ground. The nearest infected reached the fence. Accept potential resident, yes or no. Minjae selected yes. The gate stopped. Seoa dropped to her knees and slid under it. An infected man caught the heel of her shoe. Minjae grabbed her wrists and pulled. The shoe tore off. Seoa rolled inside as the gate came down again. A gray hand reached through the final gap. The steel shutter crushed the wrist against the concrete. The fingers kept moving. The infected outside hammered against the shutter until the metal shook in its tracks. Minjae dragged Seoa away from the door. She tried to stand and almost fell. Her bare foot left a dark print on the concrete. The blood on her clothes had already begun to dry. He held a broken length of pipe between them and told her to keep her hands where he could see them. Seoa stared at the pipe, then at the pale windows floating in front of his eyes. She could not see the interface, but she understood his suspicion. She explained that she had been working the night shift at a small emergency clinic. The first infected patient had arrived with a bite on his forearm. He had stopped breathing for nearly a minute, then attacked the doctor who leaned over him. Within 10 minutes, half the room was covered in blood. Soa had escaped through the ambulance bay. She lifted her sleeves and turned slowly. There were scratches on her forearms, but no bite marks. The system opened a quarantine route through the building. Blue arrows led Minjae toward an old staff shower near the loading office. Emergency construction available. Basic quarantine station. Required materials: 1 portable partition, 4 plastic sheets, 12 meters of cable, 1 lockable door. Energy cost: 6 units. Available materials detected within assigned shelter zone. Minjae accepted the plan. The system did not create anything. It highlighted the exact pieces he needed in the surrounding rooms. He and Saya moved a folding office partition, stripped plastic from abandoned freight covers, and carried a spare door from a storage cage. When everything lay inside the marked area, pale lines formed around the pieces. The partition rose by itself, guided by invisible force. Cable threaded through drilled holes, plastic stretched across the frame. The door swung into position and locked with a sharp click. The whole process took less than a minute, but the system consumed power from an energy reserve that had appeared beside Minjae's name. He had 20 units left. Sewa looked at the finished room. "You built that." Minjae told her that the system had built it. He had only supplied the materials. "Then the system has better hands than most contractors." It was the first joke either of them had made since the emergency alert. Seo entered quarantine voluntarily. Minjae sealed the door and passed water through a service slot. The system displayed her temperature, pulse, visible injuries, and estimated infection probability. The number dropped from 4.7 to 3.9 after she washed the blood from her skin. Outside the building, the pounding weakened. The infected followed movement and sound. When the yard became quiet, most drifted toward the road. Minjae climbed to the roof. Smoke rose from 3 districts. A helicopter passed over the Han River, flying low and fast. It disappeared behind the apartment towers. Seconds later, a black plume rolled above the rooftops. The system mapped the shelter. The logistics center consisted of a 3-story office block attached to a warehouse. The northern wall faced the main road. The eastern yard contained 6 loading bays and 2 rusting trailers. The western fence bordered a drainage channel. The southern service road led towards small factories and a subway maintenance entrance. The building had strengths: thick walls, few ground-level windows, a rooftop water tank, a large central space suitable for construction. It also had weaknesses: 5 loading shutters, broken cameras, a damaged diesel generator, 1 collapsed section of perimeter fence, an underground reservoir with a seized pump. Shelter status: food, 2 days for 2 residents. Clean water, 1 day. Electricity, emergency battery only. Outer defense, 38%. Internal fire safety, 46%. Minjae spent the afternoon searching. He found vending machine snacks, instant coffee, bottled water, a first aid box, 2 fire axes, a crowbar, rope, and a warehouse office full of outdated delivery records. The most valuable discovery was a maintenance room that had been locked from the inside. When Minjae knocked, something heavy scraped across the floor. A man's voice demanded his name. Minjae answered and explained that he had been assigned to inspect the building before demolition. The door opened 3 centimeters. A broad face appeared behind a security chain. The man was in his late 50s, with silver hair cut close to his scalp and a flashlight taped beneath a short iron bar. Park Dae-sik had supervised security at the center for 11 years. The company had dismissed most of the staff 2 weeks earlier. Dae-sik had returned that morning to collect tools he had forgotten in his locker. When the violence started, he locked himself in the maintenance room. The system analyzed him. Name: Park Dae-sik. Former occupation: Site Security Chief. Building knowledge: Grade A. Mechanical skill: Grade B. Estimated violence probability: 18%. Estimated loyalty after 30 days: 74%. Dae-sik could not see the numbers. He looked at Seoa through the quarantine window and asked whether she had been bitten. She answered that she had not. He opened the door. Dasik knew about the underground reservoir. Years earlier, the center had stored chemicals, and local regulations had required a large emergency water supply. The tank still held several thousand liters, but the electric pump had failed during the winter. He also knew the generator was not destroyed. Someone had removed a fuel line and battery after the center closed. Both could be replaced. The system offered a shelter mission. Restore water access within 24 hours. Reward: 10 development points. Water quality sensor. Emergency resident capacity increased to 5. Failure consequence: severe dehydration risk. Dasik led Minjae into the basement. The air smelled of wet concrete and old oil. They found the pump room behind a rusted steel hatch. The motor was intact, but the impeller had fused with corrosion. Minjae wanted to use the remaining energy to build a new pumping assembly. The system calculated that he lacked copper wire and a pressure regulator. Dasik crouched beside the housing and struck it twice with a wrench. Machines stop because people leave them alone, he said. Sometimes they only need to be reminded that they have a job. The third strike loosened a plate. Black water poured across the floor. They spent 4 hours taking the pump apart. Minjae scraped corrosion from the shaft. Dasik polished the impeller with sandpaper from a tool cabinet. Seo remained in quarantine, but she called instructions through the building intercom after Minjae found the old control panel. She reminded them to cover their mouths, because standing water could carry bacteria. The work almost failed when the shaft seal split. Minjae searched the maintenance shelves and found no replacement. The system highlighted a rubber gasket inside an abandoned forklift hydraulic assembly. It was the wrong shape, but the material could withstand pressure. Dasik cut it down with a utility knife. Minjae used 6 energy units to let the construction function fit the gasket precisely around the shaft. At sunset, they connected the pump to an emergency battery. The motor coughed. The lights dimmed. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then water climbed through the inspection pipe. It emerged brown, then gray, then clear. Mission complete. Basic water access restored. Development points awarded. The system warned that the reservoir water still required filtration and boiling. It marked the location of filters inside a home improvement store, 2 kilometers away. That became the first supply mission. Seoul's infection probability fell below 1% by morning. The system released her from quarantine. Dasik became a provisional resident. Emergency population reached 3. Before they left the building, Minjae created rules on a sheet of warehouse paper. No one entered without quarantine. No one hid a bite. Food and water were counted after every use. The gate opened only by agreement of 2 residents. Dasik read the rules and pointed at the last line. You control the gate. Minjae said that was why someone else needed the right to stop him. They took a delivery van with half a tank of fuel. Dasik drove. Minjae sat beside him with the crowbar. Seo stayed near the side door with a fire axe and a medical bag. The streets had changed overnight. Abandoned cars filled the intersections. Storefront glass covered the sidewalks. Emergency announcements repeated from public speakers, but the words were broken by static. They reached the home improvement store through the underground parking ramp. The main entrance was blocked by infected. The lower level seemed empty. The system mapped useful supplies inside the building, but its scan stopped at reinforced walls. It detected movement without identifying the source. They entered through a service corridor. Dasik moved first because he knew how automatic doors could be opened manually. Minjae watched the ceiling signs and memorized the exit route. Soa checked each body they passed. Some were dead. 2 were still breathing, but both had bites and violent tremors. Soa closed their eyes after they stopped moving. They found water filters, chlorine tablets, batteries, table, work lights, and a compact pressure regulator. The first infected attacked when Minjae lifted a box from a shelf. It had been trapped beneath a collapsed display. Its legs did not work, but it pulled itself forward with both hands and caught his boot. Minjae swung the crowbar too early. The metal struck the floor. The infected seized his ankle and opened its mouth against the leather. Seo drove the flat side of the axe into its temple. The blow stunned it but did not kill it. Dasik stepped on its wrist. Minjae pulled free and struck again, this time using both hands and aiming behind the ear. The skull gave way. His arms shook after the body stopped moving. The system displayed a combat evaluation. Reaction speed, below recommended level. Strike efficiency, 31%. Risk exposure, high. Minjae closed the message. Noise came from the far end of the aisle. 3 infected ran around the corner. A 4th crawled across the tops of stacked boxes, its fingers tearing through cardboard. Dasik shouted for them to retreat. Seowa grabbed the medical bag. Minjae pushed a loaded cart into the aisle, but the first infected knocked it aside. They could not outrun the infected while carrying supplies. Minjae looked up. The aisle shelving was bolted together in a long row. The store had already marked the damaged section for replacement. One vertical support had been bent by a forklift. He ordered Dasik to pull the emergency release on a pallet rack. Dasik understood immediately. He struck the locking pin with his iron bar. Minjae wrapped a cargo strap around the bent support and connected it to an electric pallet jack. Seo held the side corridor, swinging the axe in short, controlled arcs that kept the infected from reaching her body. The crawling infected dropped from the boxes behind her. It caught her shoulder and drove her into the floor. Minjae started the pallet jack. The strap tightened. The weakened support tore free. A full row of shelves leaned across the aisle. Seo rolled under a display table as metal frames and boxes crashed down. 2 infected vanished beneath the weight. The crawler tried to rise. Dasik pinned its neck with the iron bar, while Minjae finished it with the crowbar. The remaining infected climbed over the wreckage. They abandoned 2 boxes of supplies and reached the parking ramp with only what they could drag on the cart. More infected had gathered near the entrance, drawn by the collapse. Dasik reversed the van through a maintenance gate. Minjae and Seoa held onto the side door, while infected struck the vehicle. One shattered the rear window. Seoa pushed a work light through the opening and blinded it long enough for Minjae to slam the door against its arm. The van reached the street. They returned with enough filtration equipment for 5 people. The system awarded development points for the successful supply mission, but it also recorded Minjae's errors. He had underestimated hidden movement, chosen a narrow aisle, and carried too much weight before securing an exit. That night, he redrew the route from memory and marked every decision that had nearly killed them. Soa sat across from him, cleaning the axe. She told him that most people survived their first mistake only because someone else stood nearby. Minjae looked toward Dasik, who was repairing the generator battery connector under a lamp. Shelter Zero had 3 residents. For the first time, the number felt less like a reward and more like a responsibility. The generator ran on the 3rd day. Dasik rebuilt the missing fuel line from a truck hose and a brass fitting. Minjae used the system to align the damaged battery terminals. When the engine started, lights came on across the ground floor, 1 row at a time. Electricity changed the building more than Minjae expected. The warehouse no longer felt abandoned. Fans pushed stale air from the offices. Cameras showed the empty yard. Soa could sterilize instruments. Dasik heated canned soup on a portable stove and complained that the generator sounded like an old man breathing through a wet towel. The fuel gauge showed less than 6 hours of continuous power. The system recommended scheduled use. 2 hours in the morning, 2 in the evening. Emergency activation during attacks. On the 4th day, a voice came through the short-range radio they had taken from the store. A teenager was calling from an internet cafe 3 streets away. Her name was Lee Nari. She had locked herself in a staff room after customers began attacking one another. She had water from a dispenser, but no food remained. She claimed the infected had left the building. The system estimated a 62% chance that at least 1 infected remained inside. Minjae prepared a rescue route. Seoa insisted on going because the caller might be injured. Dasik stayed behind to control the gate. They found Nari behind 2 vending machines she had pushed against the staff door. She was 17, thin, and furious that they had taken so long. A blue streak ran through the front of her black hair. Her backpack contained a laptop, 3 phones, a screwdriver set, and 6 packets of stolen cookies. Her risk profile showed a high probability of theft and rule breaking. Her technical skill was grade B. Her communications potential was grade A. Minjae accepted her as a provisional resident. The next rescue brought Kim Hwayeon and her 10-year-old granddaughter, Subin, from an apartment stairwell. Hwayeon had survived by pouring cooking oil down the steps and using furniture to block each landing. She was 66, exhausted, and still carrying a plastic container of fermented vegetables because she refused to leave it behind. Subin said almost nothing. She drew the route from her apartment to the shelter on the back of Minjae's inspection plan, including a service alley he had missed. At 5 residents, the system unlocked a basic purifier and the first reinforcement package. The purifier used charcoal, ceramic filters, chlorine, and a hand-powered pressure unit. The construction function fitted the pieces together, but residents had to pump and clean it. The reinforcement package consumed steel shelving from the warehouse and converted it into braces for the weakest loading shutter. Each improvement made the next shortage easier to see. More people required more water. More water required more power. More power required fuel. Fuel required travel. Travel required fighters, drivers, and someone who could repair the van. On the 6th day, Minjae's group found a prison transport vehicle overturned beneath an overpass. One guard was dead inside. The other had turned and remained trapped by his seatbelt. A prisoner sat in the rear compartment with his wrists cuffed to a floor ring. He had been there for nearly 2 days. His name was Han Ji-hoon. The system reported high physical strength, strong spatial awareness, and a violence probability of 43%. A damaged police tablet in the front of the vehicle still held his record. Armed robbery, assault during arrest, 7 years served. He had been transferred for a court hearing when the outbreak began. Seoul wanted to free him before deciding anything else. Ji-hoon watched them through the steel mesh. He did not beg. He only asked for water and told them the dead guard's keys were beneath the passenger seat. An infected appeared at the end of the underpass. Then another. The sound of the van had drawn them. Minjae unlocked one cuff and attached the other to a length of chain. Ji-hoon climbed out with one wrist still restrained. The first infected rushed Sela. Ji-hoon stepped between them and used the chain to catch its throat. He pulled backward, turned his hips, and drove the infected into the side of the transport van. Its teeth snapped inches from his forearm. Minjae struck the knee from the side. The leg folded. Ji-hoon tightened the chain until Seiya could finish the infected with her axe. The second attacker was a former police officer in body armor. Minjae's crowbar glanced off the helmet. The infected knocked him onto the hood of a car. Ji-hoon could have run. The chain was no longer attached to anything. Instead, he wrapped it around the officer's ankles and pulled. The infected fell. Minjae drove the pointed end of the crowbar through the gap beneath the helmet. Afterward, Ji-hoon held out his cuffed wrist. Minjae removed the restraint. Ji-hoon entered quarantine with no argument. Taewon had not yet reached the shelter, so no one knew how deeply that choice would divide the residents. The 8th day brought veterinarian Bae Hyejin from a clinic where she had kept 4 dogs alive behind treatment cages. 2 had been exposed to infected blood. Hyejin insisted on testing them before leaving. One turned during the examination. She killed it herself with an injection and carried the other 3 animals to the van. The system would not count animals as residents, but it classified the surviving dogs as possible early warning assets after quarantine. The 9th day brought Oh Jun-suk, a former delivery rider and small-time streamer, who had been using a camera drone to search rooftops for safe routes. He joined after guiding Minjae's van around a blocked intersection. His risk profile showed impulsiveness, attention-seeking, and high adaptability. The 11th day brought Choi Eun-mi, a former prosecutor, with 6 civilians from a courthouse service tunnel. 3 of them chose to remain at Shelter Zero. The others left after one night to search for relatives. Eun-mi immediately asked who had the authority to punish residents and how that authority could be challenged. Minjae told her they had not needed a court yet. She looked at Ji-hoon, then at the locked food cage, and answered that they would. On the 14th day, former police lieutenant Song Tae-won arrived with 2 injured officers and 4 civilians. Only Tae-won and 1 civilian survived the first week after arrival. 1 officer had hidden a bite. The second died from blood loss after a failed amputation. The remaining civilians left during a supply convoy to a church shelter. Taewon recognized Ji-hoon's name from the prison record. He demanded that Ji-hoon be restrained. The argument filled the central warehouse. By then, 13 provisional and permanent residents lived inside the building. Some had heard that Ji-hoon was useful during supply runs. Others knew only that he had committed armed robbery. Taewon explained that the shelter had food, children, and weak points known to every resident. A convicted violent offender could take advantage of all three. Ji-hoon leaned against a support column and said nothing. Minjae opened the system profile. Ji-hoon's violence probability had fallen from 43% to 29%. His estimated loyalty had risen each time he returned from a dangerous mission. Taewon's violence probability was 22%. His probability of using excessive force during a crisis was 37%. The numbers did not provide a clean answer. Eunmi asked Minjae whether the system could prove what a person would do. It could not. She asked whether it had predicted Nari's theft before any theft occurred. Minjae answered that it had shown a risk. That same evening, 6 battery packs and a handheld radio disappeared from the communications desk. Suspicion moved toward Ji-hoon almost immediately. Taewon searched his sleeping area and found a lockpick made from a steel strip. Ji-hoon admitted making it. He used it on supply missions when doors blocked the group. The system raised the shelter's theft probability to 17%. Minjae checked the internal cameras. The angle near the communications desk had been changed 12 minutes before the items vanished. Nari was responsible for maintaining the camera software. He found her in the rooftop stairwell with the radio connected to a car battery. She had been calling every public channel for her parents. The missing battery packs powered the transmitter. Nari expected to be expelled. She packed her laptop before Minjae reached the roof. He asked why she had not requested permission. She said, adults always answered no when a child asked to use something important. Her parents had been trapped across the river when the bridges closed. She believed that if she transmitted long enough, they might hear her. Minjae wanted to tell her that the batteries were needed for the water sensors and night cameras. He stopped when he saw the call list on the laptop. She had made more than 300 attempts. He returned the radio to the communications desk and created a schedule. Nari could broadcast for 30 minutes each evening. She would repay the stolen power by maintaining cameras, repairing phones, and training a second operator. Eunmi insisted that the decision be recorded publicly. Taewon objected. He said theft during a disaster should carry a harsher consequence. Hwayeon asked whether throwing a 17-year-old into the street would return the electricity. No one answered. The next morning, the system lowered the probability of repeat theft. It also lowered morale, because several residents believed Minjae favored useful people. That was the first time he saw how one solution could damage another part of the shelter. Eunmi helped him write a basic code. A risk estimate could justify observation, quarantine, or temporary restriction. It could not serve as proof of a crime. Residents accused of wrongdoing had the right to hear the evidence. Food, water, medical care, and protection could not be removed as punishment. Expulsion required a vote by the administrator and 2 elected residents, except during an immediate attack. Taewon disliked the code, but he agreed to enforce it after Minjae added emergency powers with a strict time limit. The shelter grew. Cho Ara, a 23-year-old agriculture student, was found in a university greenhouse with seed packets taped beneath her clothes. She had kept lettuce alive with water collected from air conditioning units. Firefighter Yoo Min-sok was rescued from a partially collapsed station. His left arm had been burned, but he still directed Minjae toward 3 trapped civilians before accepting treatment. A mechanic named Kwang-soo joined with his wife. 2 brothers from a grocery warehouse arrived after hearing Nari's broadcasts. A mother and teenage son came from the church convoy. Not everyone stayed. Some could not accept the quarantine rules. Others left to find family. The system recorded permanent residence only after 7 days of quarantine, agreement to the shelter code, and assignment to regular work. Emergency functions could use provisional counts. Major construction required permanent residence. At 10 permanent residents, the workshop unlocked. At 15, the system offered expanded storage and a reinforced inner gate. At 19, the shelter had enough labor to run 3 supply teams but food reserves had fallen to 12 days. The 20th permanent resident would unlock hydroponics and refrigerated storage. The final candidate arrived on the 22nd day with a group from a psychiatric clinic. There were 4 survivors: a nurse with a broken wrist, a young orderly, a man named Lim Dute who wore a clinic jacket and spoke with controlled patience. He helped Soa calm the elderly patient during quarantine. He noticed tension between Taewon and Jihoon after watching them for less than a minute. He offered to organize group meetings for residents who could not sleep. His system profile showed high social perception, moderate clinical knowledge, and a violence probability of 31%. Identity verification was incomplete because the network connection had failed days earlier. Dute said he had worked as a counseling assistant. The nurse had a fever unrelated to the virus and drifted in and out of consciousness. The orderly had lost his hearing after an explosion. Neither corrected him. Dute became useful quickly. He listened to residents who feared the gates would fail. He helped Hwayeon persuade a grieving father to eat. He told Taewon that strict rules gave frightened people something solid to hold. He told Eunni that authority needed limits. He told Jihoon that no one would ever forget his record. Each statement contained enough truth to earn trust. Subin avoided him. When Seo asked why, the girl said Dute smiled before other people finished speaking, as though he already knew what they would say. Minjae recorded the observation. He had no evidence of wrongdoing. On the 29th day, the 20th resident completed permanent registration. The system filled the central warehouse with pale construction lines. Population threshold reached. 20. Hydroponic farm available. Refrigerated storage available. Internal camera network available. Shelter development tier increased. New risks detected. Estimated theft probability, 9.4%. Estimated organized violence probability, 6.8%. Estimated homicide probability within 30 days, 2.1%. The number was low. Minjae still looked at every face in the warehouse. 20 people applauded as the frame of the first growing room rose from steel racks and plastic panels. Gyute stood beside the control box. He watched the cameras come online. The hydroponic farm required 3 days of construction. Era designed the growing rows around the limited pump pressure. The system could have built a larger room, but the reservoir and generator could not support it. Minjae selected a smaller plan with space for expansion. Residents dismantled warehouse racks, cleaned plastic tanks, carried bags of fertilizer from the university greenhouse, and cut reflective panels from office partitions. The construction field assembled the pieces only after Ara approved each measurement. For the first time since the outbreak, the shelter worked toward something that would not be consumed within a week. That hope created carelessness. The generator ran longer to power the pumps and construction field. Cameras on the western fence lost power twice. DASIC reported that a contact sensor on service door 4 had failed. Minjae added the repair to the morning list. That night, Dute held a group meeting in the second-floor break room. He encouraged residents to describe what frightened them most. The orderly from the clinic, whose name was Junpil, sat near the door with a notebook. His hearing had begun to return in one ear. Junpil wrote something, tore out the page, and placed it in his pocket. Dute noticed. At 2:17 in the morning, the shelter lost power. The generator did not slow gradually. It stopped with a hard metallic crack. Emergency lights came on in the office block. The warehouse remained dark because the construction field had consumed most of the battery reserve. Minjae woke to the system alarm. External sensor failure. Western service corridor. Unregistered movement detected inside shelter boundary. Estimated infected count. More than 12. A scream rose from the ground floor. Minjae pulled on his boots and ran into the stairwell. Seo came from the medical room with a headlamp and trauma bag. Taewon was already shouting for the night guards to seal the inner gate. The warehouse lights flashed once as DASIC tried to restart the generator. In that brief white burst, Minjae saw infected moving between the storage racks. They had entered through service door 4. The door connected the western drainage channel to a narrow maintenance corridor. It should have been locked from the inside. The failed sensor had hidden the opening. One infected struck the inner mesh gate. Another crawled beneath a loading platform. A third wore the remains of a factory uniform and moved with both arms bent against its chest. Its spine twisted, but its legs fast. Taewon ordered the guards to form a line near the stairs. Ji-hoon came from the sleeping room, carrying a sledgehammer. Jun-sok launched his small drone from the second-floor balcony, using its light to track movement in the dark. Minjae opened the shelter map. The infected were spread across the warehouse, not concentrated near the breach. Closing the inner gate would protect the offices, medical room, and sleeping areas. It would also trap 5 residents who had been working the late shift in the hydroponic construction zone. The system calculated the safest response. Seoul Warehouse Sector 1. Estimated resident loss, 5. Estimated shelter survival probability, 88%. Minjae rejected the command. Taewon saw the inner gate remain open and demanded that he close it. Minjae told him to hold the stairs for 3 minutes. 3 minutes becomes 30 seconds when people panic. He held the line anyway. Minjae, Ji-hoon, and Min-sok entered the warehouse. Jun-sok's drone moved above them, its light shaking across the racks. The first infected came from the left. Ji-hoon met it with the sledgehammer, but the narrow aisle prevented a full swing. The head struck the shoulder instead of the skull. The infected slammed him into a shelf. Min-sok hooked his axe behind its knee and pulled. Minjae drove a short steel rod through the base of its head. A second infected dropped from the loading platform onto Min-sok's back. Minjae grabbed its jacket. The fabric tore. Min-sok lowered his center of gravity, drove backward into a support beam, and crushed the infected between his body and the steel. Ji-hoon finished it with a downward blow. More shapes moved beyond the drone light. The late shift workers had barricaded themselves inside the unfinished farm using nutrient tanks. The plastic walls would not hold for long. Minjae tried to raise the completed emergency partition through the system. The construction function failed. Insufficient power. Daeshik was in the basement. Eunmi and Hwayeon moved children and injured residents toward the roof stairwell. Every part of the shelter was operating, but no one could see the whole problem except Minjae. He directed Ji-hoon and Min-sok toward the farm, while he climbed a maintenance ladder to the overhead conveyor platform. From above, Jun-sok's drone revealed the infected route. They were entering through the service corridor, crossing beneath the western racks, then spreading toward sound. At least 20 had entered. More remained outside. The drainage channel behind the building acted like a trench. Infected, wandering along it, had been drawn through the open door. Minjae reached the old conveyor controls. The belt had not operated in years, but its frame ran above the warehouse toward loading bay 2. If the generator returned, the conveyor could create a moving noise source and pull infected away from the farm. He radioed Daeshik. Only static answered. Then Daeshik's voice came through. The generator's fuel valve had been closed manually, and a tool had been driven into the starter assembly. He could repair it, but the basement fire door had locked when power failed. Minjae could release the door from the main control panel. Nari was in the control room, but the infected had reached the corridor outside her. Below, Ji-hoon and Min-sok were halfway to the farm. 3 infected closed from the right. Ji-hoon threw the sledgehammer into the nearest one's chest. The impact knocked it backward, but he lost his main weapon. Min-sok pulled him behind a forklift. They used the vehicle as cover, striking through the open frame. One infected grabbed Min-sok's bird arm. He cried out and nearly lost the axe. Ji-hoon trapped the attacker's wrist against the forklift mast and broke it by forcing the hydraulic lever. The mast rose 6 centimeters and pinned the arm. Min-sok cut into the neck until the body stopped moving. Minjae descended beside the control room. Nari had pushed a desk against the door. An infected slammed against it from the other side. The frame cracked around the lock. Minjae entered through the ceiling service panel. Nari sat beneath the camera monitors with a screwdriver in one hand and a broken keyboard in the other. She had restored 3 feeds. One showed service door 4, hanging open. The latch had been blocked with a strip of folded metal. Another feed showed Junpil lying near the break room stairs. His head was bleeding. The third showed Gyute helping Taewon's defensive line. Minjae released the basement fire door from the control panel. The infected outside the room broke through. It came over the desk on all fours. Nari struck its face with the keyboard. Plastic keys scattered across the floor. Minjae caught the infected's throat with a loop of electrical cable and pulled from behind, but its body twisted with enough force to drag him over the desk. Nari crawled toward the door. The infected drove an elbow into Minjae's ribs. His grip loosened. Its teeth turned toward his cheek. Nari jammed the screwdriver through its ear. The infected jerked sideways. Minjae tightened the cable, planted both feet against the desk, and pulled until the neck stopped resisting. Nari's hands shook so badly that she dropped the screwdriver twice when she tried to pick it up. Minjae told her to find a route from the basement to the warehouse. She brought up the old building plans. The basement fire door opened into a utility passage beneath the western racks. Infected had crossed above it. Daesik would emerge behind them. Minjae warned him to stay inside. Daesik ignored the warning. The generator started 20 seconds later. Lights flooded the warehouse. The infected reacted at once. Some turned toward the ceiling fixtures. Others froze long enough for Taewon's guards to strike through the mesh gate. Minjae activated the overhead conveyor. The belt groaned into motion. Empty metal hooks rattled across the frame. Junseok attached the drone to the final hook with a cable tie, then set its alarm to maximum volume. The light and sound moved above the infected toward loading bay 2. 7 followed. Minjae opened the loading shutter 30 centimeters and activated a forklift horn beside it. The infected dropped to their knees and forced themselves through the gap into the fenced bay. Daesik reached the warehouse through the utility passage. He carried a wrench and a portable fuel can. He should have turned east toward the stairs. Instead, he saw the western fire door standing open behind the infected. If the door remained open, more would enter. The electronic closer had failed. Someone needed to cross the utility passage and lower the manual locking bar. Daesik knew the route better than anyone. He ran before Minjae could reach him. 2 infected noticed. One wore a torn delivery jacket. The other moved low with a broken hip, using the wall to propel itself forward. Daesik threw the fuel can. It struck the first infected and burst across the floor. He hit the second in the jaw with the wrench, but the creature caught his sleeve. Jihoon reached them and swung a length of pipe. The infected released Daesik. Jihoon dragged him toward the door. Another infected emerged from the passage behind them. Daesik shoved Jihoon through the doorway and pulled the manual bar down. The fire door closed between them. The infected struck Daesik from behind before the seal met the floor. Minjae reached the other side and tried to raise the bar through the system. Manual lock engaged. Construction access blocked by active biological threat. Daesik pressed one hand against the small reinforced window. Blood spread across his shirt beneath the shoulder. He looked at Minjae and told him to finish the building. Then the infected pulled him away from the glass. Jihoon tried to lift the door. Minjae joined him. The manual bar was designed to resist a vehicle impact. It did not move. The warehouse fight continued around them. The late shift workers broke from the farm barricade when Minseok cleared the aisle. Taewon opened the inner gate long enough to pull them through. Junseok moved the drone toward loading bay 2, drawing more infected into the fenced bay. Minjae forced himself away from the fire door. He used the restored power to activate 3 construction fields. The first built a barrier across the western aisle from steel pallets. The second lowered the loading bay 2 shutter behind the trapped infected. The third reinforced the inner gate where Taewon's line was failing. Each field consumed stored energy and development points. Warnings filled his vision. He accepted the cost. One infected climbed the steel pallets before the barrier sealed. It landed behind Seoul in the treatment hall. Heijin threw a metal tray into its face. Seo pulled an injured resident off the floor. The infected caught her scrub jacket and tore it down the back. Taewon fired the shelter's only pistol from the bottom of the stairs. The first shot struck the wall. The second entered below the infected's eye. The gunshot drew every remaining creature toward the stairwell. Taewon had 4 rounds left. Jihoon recovered the sledgehammer. Minseok stood beside him, with blood running from his injured arm. Minjae opened the reinforced inner gate, just wide enough for one infected at a time. They turned the gate into a choke point. Taewon controlled the opening. Ji-hoon broke legs and shoulders with the hammer. Min-sok pulled fallen bodies aside so they could not block the mechanism. Minjae struck through the gap with a sharpened steel rod. When one infected jammed its body sideways, Seoul used a fire extinguisher to force it back. The pressure lasted 11 minutes. It felt longer than the entire month before it. At the end, the final infected lay beneath the gate with its fingers still scraping the floor. Ji-hoon ended the movement with one blow. Shelter status. External breach contained. Permanent resident deaths. 1. Critical injuries. 2. Minor injuries. 7. Infected remains inside boundary. 0. Minjae did not close the report until he reached Daesik. The utility passage was silent. Daesik lay near the generator room. The infected around him had been trapped when he lowered the bar. He had killed one with the wrench. The others had killed him. Seoul covered his body with a maintenance blanket. The sabotage investigation began after sunrise. Nari recovered camera logs from before the power failure. Someone had looped 8 seconds of empty corridor footage over the feed from Service Door 4. The method required access to the new camera network. Junpil survived the blow to his head. When he could write again, he gave Eunmi the page from his pocket. It said that Lim Gyute had never worked at the clinic. Gyute had been a patient under observation after police connected him to the disappearances of 3 people. The outbreak had opened his locked ward. He had taken a dead counselor's jacket and badge. Gyute admitted disabling the camera and generator. He denied intending to open the shelter to a horde. He had planned to lure one infected through Service Door 4, kill Junpil, and make the death resemble an attack. The infected in the drainage channel had arrived in greater numbers than he expected. He spoke calmly, while Taewon restrained him. He said Minjae's rules had created the opportunity. A leader willing to act on instinct would have removed him when the system showed a 31% violence probability. Minjae looked at the residents gathered around the interrogation table. Ji-hoon's first risk had been higher than Gyute's. Nari's theft risk had been accurate, yet her work had saved the control room. Taewon's use of force risk had also been accurate, and his pistol had saved Sewa. The system measured pressure. It did not decide what a person would become beneath it. Minjae told Gyute that the rules had not opened the door. Gyute had. Eunmi presented the evidence publicly. The residents voted to keep Gyute confined in a reinforced shipping container inside the inner yard. He would receive food, water, medical care, and supervised exercise. He would never again access the power system or gates. Taewon wanted execution. Ji-hoon surprised everyone by opposing it. He said a shelter that killed prisoners whenever fear rose would eventually find reasons to create more prisoners. They buried Daesik on a strip of ground near the eastern fence. Subin placed his wrench on the grave until Hwayeon explained that the shelter still needed it. The girl replaced it with a drawing of the building. Every door was labeled. On the roof, she had drawn Daesik holding a flashlight. That evening, Minjae gathered the residents in the warehouse. The hydroponic farm had survived. Several panels were cracked. One nutrient tank had been punctured. Aura had already begun repairs. Minjae admitted that he had known the shelter's homicide risk. He had not known who would act or why. He also admitted that keeping every decision in his own hands had made the shelter weaker. When he went to the control room, no one else could approve construction. When he entered the warehouse, no one else could see the full map. The residents adopted the Shelter Zero Charter. The administrator controlled the system and emergency construction. The council controlled long-term rules, punishment, ration standards, and admission policy. Security could act during an attack, but emergency authority expired after 12 hours, unless the council renewed it. Every critical role required a trained replacement. The new structure did not eliminate risk. It distributed responsibility. Nari repaired the radio after the meeting. A strong signal entered the shelter frequency just before midnight. A man introduced himself as Ryu Songjin, director of Aegis Tower. He knew the location of Shelter Zero. He knew that they had working water, a generator, and approximately 20 residents. He offered food, medicine, ammunition, and cooperation. Then his voice changed. There are no independent shelters left in Seoul. There are only shelters that have not learned who protects them. The transmission ended. A new system objective appeared: survive the first winter. Winter reached the shelter before the first snow. The temperature dropped through the concrete at night. Condensation formed on the warehouse roof and froze along the beams. The generator consumed fuel faster because the medical room and water pipes needed heat. The hydroponic farm produced its first lettuce on the 46th day of the outbreak. Ara cut one head into 20 pieces. Hwayeon placed a green leaf on each bowl of rice porridge. The residents ate slowly, as if chewing could make the portion larger. The system calculated that the farm supplied 9% of daily calories. It was also far from enough. Shelter population had risen to 31 permanent residents through small rescues and radio contact. Every person completed quarantine and accepted a work assignment. A former electrician improved the generator schedule. 2 construction workers repaired the western fence. A widowed mother helped Hwayeon in the kitchen. 3 older residents sorted medicine and cleaned filters. Food reserves fell to 23 days. Diesel reserves fell to 9 days at minimum operation. The system offered a second residential block and a larger farm at 35 residents. Minjae delayed both. Materials had become as valuable as food, and each construction project consumed power. A radio message arrived from a research clinic near the river. Dr. Baek Sung-gu identified himself as a virologist working under a national infectious disease program. He was sheltering with 14 patients and staff in a sealed diagnostic wing. Their backup generator had failed. 2 patients needed oxygen. He possessed research on the virus and an experimental medicine that could delay its progression after exposure. The clinic lay 6 kilometers away. The direct road crossed 2 major intersections and passed within 4 blocks of Aegis Tower. Taewon considered the mission too risky. Seiya considered the doctor too valuable to abandon. Eunmi asked whether the other patients would also be rescued. Minjae said they would take everyone they could carry. The system estimated that adding 15 residents would reduce the food reserve to 14 days. It also predicted that medical capacity would improve by 40% if Songwoo survived. The council approved the mission by 1 vote. Minjae led Jihoon, Seowa, Ninsok, Junsok, and 2 drivers. They took the delivery van and a repaired fire engine from Minsok's station. The fire engine carried less water than it once had, but its reinforced front could push through abandoned cars. Nari guided them by radio, using drone footage and traffic cameras that still responded on an isolated municipal network. The first intersection was blocked by a pileup. Junsok flew the drone above it and found a bus lane clear on the far side. The fire engine could reach it only by crossing a pedestrian plaza. The paving stones had been built over an underground parking deck. Minjae checked the loading signs and saw that the fire engine exceeded the safe weight near the center. He marked a route along the outer support columns. Minsok drove with the left wheels close to the building line. The pavement cracked beneath the rear axle, but held. At the clinic, the diagnostic wing remained sealed. The entrance hall contained more than 50 infected. Some wore hospital gowns. Others had become trapped behind reception barriers and struck the glass whenever the rescue team moved. Songbu's group waited on the 4th floor. The fire stairs were blocked by bodies. The elevator had stopped between floors. Minjae entered through the ambulance service corridor. The system detected a medical oxygen line running through the walls. It also warned that a ruptured line could turn a spark into an explosion. They moved without firearms. Jihoon and Minsok controlled the front. Seiya identified doors that could contain patients. Junsok sent the drone through ceiling gaps. Minjae used wheeled privacy screens to create temporary lanes. On the 2nd floor, a howler blocked the stairwell. It had been an elderly man. The virus had swollen the tissue around his throat and chest. Each breath produced a wet vibration. When it saw the team, it inhaled until the ribs lifted beneath its skin. Seiya warned them to cover their ears. The cry struck the corridor like pressure. Glass cracked in 2 doors. Infected below began moving toward the stairs. Jihoon charged before the howler could call again. He held a riot shield taken from Taewon's supplies. The creature struck the shield with both hands and pushed him against the wall. Min-sok swung his axe at the neck. The first blow entered swollen tissue, but stopped against bone. The howler turned and opened its mouth. Minjae pulled a fire hose from the cabinet, looped it around the creature's torso, and attached the end to a powered hospital bed. Jun-sok activated the bed controls from the wall. The motor pulled the hose tight. The howler lost balance and fell backward. Ji-hoon pinned its arms with the shield. Min-sok struck twice more. The second cry ended as air escaped through the wound. Infected were climbing from the floor below. Minjae opened 2 patient room doors and used the system to connect the metal frames with privacy screens. The emergency barrier cost 4 energy units and lasted only 10 minutes. It held the first infected at the lower landing, while the team climbed. They reached Songwoo with 6 minutes left. The doctor was 48, thin and pale from exhaustion. He carried a hard case against his chest. 10 patients could walk, 2 needed stretchers. 2 had died since the radio call. The evacuation became slower than the ascent. The temporary barrier failed as the last stretcher reached the 3rd floor. Infected entered the stairwell below. Minjae could not rebuild the barrier without more metal. He ordered the group into an imaging room and examined the wall plan. The room shared a service shaft with the ambulance bay. The shaft was too narrow for people, but it contained cables for a ceiling-mounted scanner. He used construction mode to remove the scanner's rail assembly and turn it into an anchor. Min-sok connected rescue rope. They lowered the 2 stretcher patients through a maintenance opening to the ambulance roof, 1 meter at a time. Ji-hoon and Soa held the imaging room door. The infected struck hard enough to bend the latch. Ji-hoon braced the riot shield against the handle. Each impact drove his boots backward across the floor. When the final patient reached the ambulance, Minjae ordered everyone else down the rope. Seo refused to go before Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon refused to release the door. Minjae attached a cable from the scanner assembly to the shield handle. The moment Ji-hoon moved, the cable would hold the door for a few seconds. The cable tightened. Metal screamed. The infected forced an arm through the opening. Ji-hoon descended. Seo followed. Minjae went last. The cable snapped when he was halfway down. An infected dropped through the maintenance opening and caught the back of his jacket. The rope swung against the wall. Minjae's fingers slipped. Jun-sok flew the drone directly into the infected's face. The propellers cut skin and blinded one eye. The creature released Minjae to seize the drone. Minjae slid down the rope and landed on the ambulance roof hard enough to twist his ankle. The infected fell after him. Ji-hoon raised the riot shield from the ground. The body struck it and rolled beneath the fire engine's rear wheel. Min-sok drove. The rescue convoy returned with 12 living patients, Songgu, and 3 clinic staff. After quarantine, 9 chose permanent residence. The others moved to a smaller family shelter that traded with Minjae. Songgu confirmed that the infection had 3 important limits. It spread through contaminated fluids, especially bites and blood entering wounds. Ordinary distance breathing did not transmit it. Early treatment could slow the neurological phase, but no medicine could reverse a complete transformation. Infected movement responded strongly to sound, heat, and fresh blood. His experimental drug could add 10 to 30 minutes after exposure. That time could allow an injured person to reach surgery or say goodbye. The system recognized Songgu's laboratory skill and unlocked an expanded medical module at 50 residents. Aegis Tower contacted them before the shelter reached that number. Ryu Songjin proposed a meeting in an underground parking structure, halfway between the 2 settlements. He arrived with 8 armed guards, 2 trucks, and a woman named Jang Mira. Mira wore a clean brown coat and carried a ledger in a waterproof case. Before the outbreak, she had managed money and transport for businesses that preferred not to appear in official records. After the outbreak, she used the same contacts to locate warehouses, fuel caches, and roads overlooked by the military. Ryu presented himself as a civil administrator. He was 55, silver-haired, and careful with every movement. Aegis Tower held nearly 200 people in a former financial complex. It had solar panels, private security, a deep parking structure, and access to several corporate supply depots. It also had a social order Ryu described as efficient. Residents with essential skills lived in the upper floors and received full rations. Laborers lived in the middle. Refugees in the lower parking levels worked for food and protection. Movement between levels required permission. Ryu offered Shelter Zero diesel, insulation, medicine, and ammunition. In return, he wanted Songgu transferred to Aegis, a permanent share of the hydroponic harvest, and access to Minjae's construction interface. Minjae explained that the system responded only to him. Ryu asked whether Minjae had tried placing another person's hand against the interface. The question revealed too much interest. Minjae refused the transfer. He offered medical cooperation, shared research, and trade. Ryu smiled and said, independent shelters always confused possession with freedom. They survived because stronger groups had not yet calculated the cost of taking what they needed. Mira kept her eyes on the ledger. The meeting ended with a small exchange. Shelter Zero received fuel and insulation. Aegis received water filters and antibiotics prepared by Seo's team. On the return journey, Ji-hoon found a note folded inside one fuel invoice. Ryu intends to control all winter supply routes. Do not let him map your western entrance. Minjae suspected Mira. The food theft began 3 nights later. At first, the amount was small. 2 cans, half a bag of rice, dried fruit from the medical reserve. Hwa-yeon noticed because she measured ingredients by weight. Taewon sealed the storage cage and searched work lockers. Nothing appeared. The system raised organized theft probability to 63%. Morale fell as rumors spread. Some residents believed the former Aegis traders had planted spies. Others blamed the clinic patients. Ji-hoon's name returned in whispers, despite his record of service. Taewon proposed room searches and armed guards beside the kitchen. Eunmi argued that random searches would punish everyone, while teaching the real thieves to hide better. Minjae reviewed consumption records. The stolen food contained more calories than one person needed and included items suitable for children. He asked Nari to compare movement near the store with family schedules. 3 parents had entered the corridor after midnight on different days. They were not selling food, they were building a hidden reserve in an unused air duct. Their fear began after ration calculations appeared on the public board. The numbers showed that food would run out in 19 days if no convoy succeeded. The parents assumed children would lose rations first because they contributed less labor. The shelter code protected basic food. It did not state whose portions would be reduced during a severe shortage. The gap created the theft. Minjae called a meeting. The 3 parents admitted what they had done. Taewon demanded confinement. Hwa-yeon demanded that the stolen food be returned before mice found it. Minjae changed the ration policy. Children, pregnant residents, medical patients, and heavy labor teams received protected minimums. Daily stock levels became public. 2 residents chosen by lottery would verify the kitchen count each week. The thieves would work additional greenhouse and storage shifts until the value was repaid. Several adults objected that children were receiving protection while everyone else accepted equal danger. Hwa-yeon placed the smallest ration bowl on the table and asked which adult wanted to trade meals with Subin for a week. No one accepted. The new policy lowered the theft probability more than armed guards had. It also increased trust in the council. Minjae began to understand that the system's risk numbers behaved like pressure gauges. A rising number pointed towards strain somewhere in the shelter. Punishment could stop a hand. It rarely removed the strain. The winter deepened. They insulated the sleeping rooms. Ara expanded the farm. Songgu turned an office into a laboratory. Hyejin studied infected dogs and discovered that mutated animals still protected territory and followed scent routes. Junsok built larger drone batteries from salvaged cells. Nari's radio reached shelters across western Seoul. Population rose to 58. Aegis Tower stopped selling fuel. Ryu's final message was brief. He wanted Songgu, 10% of all food production, and a private demonstration of the system. The deadline was 7 days. Minjae spent the first day of Ryu's deadline preparing for an attack. Taewon placed guards at every gate and moved the pistol ammunition into 2 separate lockboxes. Minsok inspected fire routes. Nari changed radio frequencies twice a day. Jinsok flew drones over the roads, but kept them below the warehouse roofline, so Aegis observers would not trace the launch point. Mira arrived alone on the 3rd night. She entered through the eastern pedestrian lock, after quarantine staff confirmed that she had no wounds. Her coat was torn, and one side of her face had begun to swell. Ryu had discovered that someone was leaking transport information. He had not proved her involvement, but he had removed her access to the lower garages. Mira left before his guards searched her room. She brought a hand-drawn map. Aegis had repaired 3 sound projectors used for emergency crowd control. Mounted on trucks, they could produce a repeating low-frequency pulse that infected followed over long distances. Ryu planned to drive 2 trucks along the drainage channel west of Shelter Zero, draw several hundred infected from the commercial district, then leave the projectors operating near Minjae's perimeter. Aegis assault teams would attack during the confusion. Their objective was the laboratory and the main control room. Ryu wanted Sungu alive. He believed Minjae's system could be transferred if its administrator was forced to cooperate. The attack would begin before dawn, on the final day of the deadline. The council considered abandoning the building. The underground evacuation route was incomplete. The residents could reach the subway maintenance tunnel, but the tunnel had not been cleared beyond 600 meters. Moving children and injured people into it during a horde attack could create a trap. Minjae proposed a different plan. The drainage channel could carry infected past the western wall if they remained focused on a moving sound source. Junsok's drones could not lift the projectors, but they could carry smaller alarms. If the group disabled the truck projectors at the correct moment, the drones could guide the front of the horde south toward an empty rail yard. Taewon pointed out that the rear of the horde might continue toward the shelter. Minjae planned 3 defensive layers. The outer fence would slow the first infected. The loading yard would become a controlled kill zone, using parked trailers and steel cable. The inner gate would protect the residential block if the yard failed. He needed every available development point to build the barriers. That meant no emergency construction afterward. Seiya asked what would happen if the plan changed. Minjae said they would work with whatever remained. She watched him assign survival percentages to routes, teams, and doors. When the meeting ended, she followed him to the roof. Snow had begun to fall. It melted on the warm vents and gathered along the parapet. Seo told him that he had stopped asking people what they thought before checking their risk profiles. Minjae answered that one wrong decision could kill 58 residents. She tightened the strap on his injured ankle and said the numbers had become a place for him to hide. A probability could explain why he was afraid. It could not carry the responsibility for him. The system displayed her current profile at the edge of his vision. Loyalty, 93%. Estimated probability of disobeying an evacuation order to save another resident, 68%. Minjae closed her personal display. He told the system to hide Seowa's behavioral risks unless an immediate medical threat existed. The interface asked him to confirm. He did. Seiya could not see what he had changed. She only saw him look at her instead of the air. On the 4th day, Gyute escaped. A shaped charge damaged the outer wall of his container shortly after midnight. The blast was too small to breach the shelter. It was designed to create noise and draw guards away from the eastern fence. Aegis infiltrators had crossed the drainage channel wearing dark winter clothing. One cut the power cable to the container cameras. Another opened the damaged door from outside. Gyute left with them. Taewon wanted to pursue. Minjae refused. The tracks led toward a narrow factory street, where Aegis marksmen could wait above the road. Mira said Ryu would use Gyute for information and kill him afterward. Gyute reached Aegis Tower and offered access routes, shift schedules, and personal details about the council. He expected a position of influence. Ryu gave him a room on the lower level, under guard. 2 days later, Gyute tried to stab an Aegis security captain and take his pass card. The captain survived. Gyute was shot in the parking garage. Mira learned of his death through a trader's radio. No one at Shelter Zero mourned him. Minjae recorded the information because Jungpil had asked whether Gyute could return. The attack began at 4:20 in the morning. Nari heard the projectors before the Western sensors detected vehicles. The low pulse came through the concrete as a vibration. The three shelter dogs began barking toward the drainage channel. Junsok's drone rose from the roof. Two trucks moved without headlights along the frozen service road. Behind them, the channel was full of infected. The front ranks ran. The mass behind them pressed through snow and debris. Some fell beneath others. A howler moved near the center, its swollen throat shaking with each projector pulse. Mutated dogs ran along the channel walls. Estimated infected count: 400 to 600. Aegis assault teams detected: 24. The first projector truck stopped beside the western fence. The driver and gunner jumped into an armored van. The second truck continued south to stretch the horde along the channel. Minjae activated the outer barriers. Steel cables rose between loading pillars. Two trailers rolled on repaired wheel assemblies and locked into angled positions, creating a funnel toward loading bay 4. The eastern residents moved into the office block. Taewon divided the defenders into 3 teams. Min-sok commanded the yard. Ji-hoon commanded the western service corridor. Taewon protected the inner gate and control room. Minjae went to the roof with Junsok and Nari. The first drone carried a siren toward the southern rail yard. The second carried a bag of animal blood collected by Hyejin. The third remained above the projector truck to identify guards. Junsok sent the blood drone low across the channel. Mutated dogs turned first. Several infected followed, but the projector pulse pulled them back. The main transmitter had to stop. Ji-hoon's team left through a maintenance hatch north of the truck. They moved behind the concrete wall of the drainage channel, using the sound to hide their approach. Ji-hoon carried bolt cutters. Mira carried the projector wiring diagram. Min-sok covered them from the yard with a salvaged hunting rifle. Aegis guards saw the team at 20 meters. The first shot struck the wall beside Mira. Ji-hoon pulled her behind a drainage support. 2 more shots chipped concrete at shoulder height. Min-sok returned fire, forcing the guards behind the truck. Ji-hoon and Mira advanced between pulses. The projector produced sound in 5-second waves, followed by a 3-second reset. During each wave, the infected surged closer. During each reset, rifle shots became clear. Mira reached the truck's rear panel and cut the outer cable. Ryu's engineers had installed an internal battery. Ji-hoon climbed onto the rear platform. A guard rose from the cab and struck him with a metal baton. Ji-hoon caught the second blow on his forearm. The baton split skin. He drove his shoulder into the guard, and both men hit the side rail. The guard drew a knife. Ji-hoon trapped the wrist against the projector housing. The knife point stopped above his ribs. The next pulse vibrated through the metal and made both men lose balance. Mira climbed onto the step and struck the guard's knee with the bolt cutters. Ji-hoon twisted the knife away and pushed the man from the platform. The guard fell into the channel. The infected reached him before he stood. Mira opened the battery compartment. 3 cables matched her diagram. A 4th had been added. She cut the red cable. The projector became louder. The pulse changed frequency. The nearest infected turned directly toward the truck. Ji-hoon dragged Mira off the platform as bodies struck the rear bumper. They could not reach the control panel again. Minjae saw the failure from the roof. The truck disappeared beneath climbing infected. The projector continued to operate inside the swarm. The first part of the horde reached the western fence. Steel mesh bent inward. Mutated dogs climbed over bodies and found gaps near the support posts. Min-sok's team used long spears and axes from behind the trailer funnel. Each strike required 2 residents. One held the shaft, the other drove it forward. A brute entered the channel. It had grown across the shoulders until its coat split down the back. One arm was larger than the other. It pushed infected aside and struck the fence with enough force to pull a support post from the ground. The system warned that the western perimeter would fail in 40 seconds. Minjae ordered Ji-hoon's team back through the maintenance hatch. Mira reached it first. Ji-hoon remained behind to pull a wounded resident across the ice. The brute hit the fence again. The post fell. Infected poured into the loading yard. The trailer funnel narrowed their movement, but the brute climbed over the first cable. Minsok fired twice. One round struck the chest. The second tore through the cheek. The creature continued. Minsok ordered his line to fall back in pairs. One defender panicked and turned too early. An infected caught his coat and pulled him down. Ji-hoon entered the yard through the hatch and saw him. He crossed the open lane while Minsok covered the approach. Ji-hoon struck the infected with the bolt cutters, grabbed the defender's collar, and dragged him beneath the trailer. It lifted the trailer's rear corner several centimeters as it struck the metal. Ji-hoon and the wounded defender crawled between the wheels, and the creature bent low and reached beneath. Its enlarged hand closed around Ji-hoon's boot. Mira climbed into the trailer cab. She released the parking brake. The yard sloped toward the loading bays. The trailer rolled. The rear wheel crossed the brute's forearm. Bone broke, but the creature held on. Ji-hoon pulled his foot from the boot and rolled away as the trailer gained speed. Minsok activated the second cable barrier. The trailer struck it sideways and turned across the lane. The brute was pinned between the trailer frame and a concrete loading pillar. Ji-hoon used the bolt cutters to break the projector battery he had taken from the truck panel. He threw the sparking unit into a pool of diesel beneath the trailer. Flames spread along the ground. Minsok ordered everyone behind the loading wall before the fuel tank ignited. The explosion lifted the trailer and filled the yard with heat. The brute stopped moving. Burning infected continued through the smoke. At the same time, Aegis assault teams attacked the eastern gate. They used suppressed rifles and a portable cutting torch. Taewon's guards returned fire through narrow observation ports. The eastern gate was stronger than the western fence, but it had been designed to stop vehicles, not trained attackers working at its hinges. Nari switched the camera network to local power after Aegis cut the main cable. She identified 4 intruders moving along the roof of the office block. Minjae and Junsok left the drone station to intercept them. The roof access door opened inward. Minjae placed a steel cabinet behind it and used the system's remaining portable construction charge to anchor the cabinet to the floor. The intruders did not use the door. They rappelled down the southern wall and broke through a third-floor office window. Seiya was moving patients through the same corridor. The first attacker entered behind a ballistic shield. Minjae saw him on a camera and ordered Soa to turn off the hall lights. Nari activated the fire shutters, dividing the corridor into 3 sections. The shield team became trapped between 2 shutters. They fired through the lock of the first. The rounds penetrated thin metal and struck the wall near the medical volunteers. Seoa moved the patients into a records room. She noticed oxygen cylinders stored beside the door. A bullet through one valve could turn it into a projectile. She rolled the cylinders into the stairwell and closed the fire door. Minjae reached the floor through a surface ladder. He carried a pneumatic nail gun connected to a portable compressor. It was a construction tool, not a firearm. At close range, it could still break a hand. The first shutter opened as the attackers cut the control box. Minjae fired a nail through the lead attacker's glove into the wooden doorframe. The man dropped his rifle. Junsok threw a flash unit built from camera batteries into the corridor. White light filled the hall. The second attacker fired blindly. A round passed through Minjae's jacket and cut across his side. He fell behind a copier. Pain spread through his ribs. The system marked blood loss as moderate and recommended immediate withdrawal. Junsok dragged him toward the ladder. Minjae refused to leave until Seiya's patients were clear. The attackers recovered faster than expected. One kicked the nail gun away. Another moved around the copier. Seiya opened the stairwell fire door from the far side and released an oxygen cylinder down the steps. It struck the attacker's legs and carried him into the landing rail. Junsok activated the second camera flash directly in the corridor. Minjae used the moment to seize the dropped rifle and slide it beneath the fire shutter. Taewon arrived from below with 2 guards. He ordered the Aegis team to surrender. One did. The other tried to reach a sidearm. Taewon shot him in the shoulder and pinned him against the wall. The eastern gate held for 6 more minutes. Then the horde changed direction. The projector truck in the channel had been crushed. Its battery finally failed. Junsok's southern siren became the loudest moving source, and the front of the horde followed it toward the rail yard. The rear did not. Gunfire fire, and the shelter generator pulled several hundred infected toward the loading yard. Minjae reached the control room, with Seiya holding pressure against his side. The system displayed structural failures across the western half of the shelter. Outer fence, lost. Loading yard barrier, 22%. Inner gate, 71%. Available construction energy, 3 units. Not enough for a new wall. They could shut down the generator and reduce attraction. Doing so would stop medical equipment, cameras, and the water pumps. The horde might drift away after several hours. It might also remain because of blood and movement. Mira brought another piece of information. Aegis Tower's main generators had started at full output. Ryu was preparing his elevators and upper floor defenses. The tower stood closer to the commercial district than Shelter Zero. If Minjae removed every loud signal from the shelter, the remaining infected would follow the stronger sound north. That would send them toward Aegis. Minjae contacted Ryu by radio. He warned him to power down and evacuate the lower floors through the northern garage. Ryu accused him of redirecting the horde deliberately. Minjae said the infected were already turning toward the tower's generators. He offered the subway route to Shelter Zero for civilians who could reach the southern maintenance entrance. Ryu refused to open the lower security doors. His supply trucks were still being loaded, and an evacuation would block them. Minjae shut down Shelter Zero. Defenders stopped firing. Minsok's teams withdrew behind the inner gate and covered every light. Heejin spread chemical scent from infected animals along the drainage channel, away from the offices. Junsok guided the siren drone south until its battery died above the rail yard. For 20 minutes, infected pressed against the dark shelter. Then, the main body began moving north. Aegis Tower's gunfire reached them through the snow. Nari received panicked messages from the tower's lower floors. Ryu's guards had sealed the stairwells to protect the upper residents. Hundreds of people were trapped in the garage and service levels. Minjae reopened the western subway access and sent Minsok with rescue teams. Taewon objected. The shelter had barely survived, and every open route created another breach. Minjae answered that they could close it after the last reachable person crossed. The rescue lasted 3 hours. Aegis civilians entered the maintenance tunnel through a broken ventilation station. Some carried children. Others pushed injured people on office chairs. Ji-hoon went back twice when the crowd reported people trapped behind a jammed gate. On his third return, he found Aegis guards trying to move crates of ammunition ahead of civilians. He forced them to abandon the crates by opening a side door where infected were gathering. The guards chose the tunnel. Ryu remained in the tower. He ordered his private team to move fuel and medicine into armored trucks, while the lower floors collapsed. When infected entered the underground garage, the trucks could not turn through the crowd. One struck a support wall. Gunfire ignited spilled fuel. The fire spread into the elevator shaft. Ryu died on the 27th floor after smoke disabled the sealed ventilation system. His final radio transmission demanded that his guards protect the executive stairwell. By then, most of them had left. At dawn, 94 people stood inside Shelter Zero's quarantine zones, tunnels, loading offices, and unfinished farm extension. 45 were former Aegis residents. Several others came from nearby shelters that had followed Nari's emergency broadcast. After treatment and the 7-day registration period, the permanent population reached 103. The system unlocked district administration, a school module, a larger medical ward, waste processing, and long-range radio support. It also displayed the cost. Living space occupancy, 181%. Food reserve, 11 days. Clean water margin, 4%. Internal conflict probability, 47%. Minjae lay in the infirmary, while Seiya closed the bullet cut along his side. The round had passed through skin and muscle without entering his abdomen. He had survived because Junsok pulled him away before the second attacker reached him. Seiya finished the final stitch and told him that hiding her risk profile had been a foolish way to show trust. Minjae asked how she knew. She had watched him stop looking past her shoulder whenever they argued. He laughed once, then winced because the stitches pulled. He told her that he wanted her beside him after the crisis ended, assuming a crisis ever ended. Seiya placed the blood-stained instruments in a tray. She answered that she had already been beside him for 2 months. He could start noticing. 20 new patients waited outside the curtain, and the water alarm began sounding before Minjae could stand. The council expanded that evening. Taewon retained internal security. Eunmi chaired law and civilian disputes. Hwayeon controlled food distribution with elected inspectors. Jihoon led external operations. Ara managed agriculture. Nari managed communications. Mira accepted responsibility for trade and supply routes. Minjae remained the system administrator, but emergency construction decisions required a second council member whenever time allowed. The first new building was not a weapon. It was a heated sleeping hall, with enough floor space for every child and injured resident. When construction finished, the system issued a new objective: create a place where people choose to live, rather than a place where they are forced to survive. Spring arrived in 2032, with mud, broken roads, and the smell of thawing bodies. Shelter Zero had survived the winter, but survival had changed shape. At 103 residents, the shelter was too large to run like a household. The kitchen prepared 3 meals in shifts. The medical ward kept written records. Security teams used schedules. The hydroponic farm needed a maintenance crew. Arguments concerned noise, work hours, private space, and who had used the last clean towel. These problems pleased Hwayeon more than she admitted. People complained about towels only after they believed they would live long enough to need one tomorrow. The first elected council took office in March. Minjae kept authority over the system because no one else could see or control it. Eunmi wrote a rule requiring him to record every major construction choice and its cost. 2 council members carried sealed instructions for the gate network in case Minjae became unconscious. Nari trained 3 radio operators. Taewon trained civilian guards. Jihoon created external teams with fixed roles. Every team included a route leader, medic, rear guard, and carrier. Junsok stopped treating drones as toys after losing 2 during the Aegis battle. He built checklists and made younger operators repeat them before launch. The settlement expanded through the warehouse yard and into 2 neighboring factories. The system called the new territory a district. Residents still called it Shelter Zero. The school opened in a renovated office building. Eunmi found former teachers among the Aegis survivors. Classes included mathematics, reading, sanitation, map skills, and emergency drills. Subin sat in the front row and corrected the building diagrams whenever an adult drew a door on the wrong side. Ara doubled food production, using stacked growing beds and rooftop planters. Hwayeon still counted every grain of rice. Fresh vegetables became common enough that she stopped cutting lettuce leaves into equal strips. Songwoo and Soa produced the first reliable batch of delay medicine in summer. The drug had to be injected within minutes of exposure. It slowed the virus long enough for wound cleaning, amputation in rare cases, or transport to the medical ward. It saved 2 residents during testing and failed for a third whose bite had entered the neck. No one called it a cure. Hyejin mapped the behavior of infected animals. Mutated dogs followed scent boundaries. Boars defended feeding areas. Crows gathered around exposed biological waste. The district reduced attacks by controlling smell, burning contaminated material, and placing false scent trails away from farms. The work made the streets around Shelter Zero safer, but the district remained isolated from clean water sources and large solar arrays. In early 2033, Nari received a military signal from eastern approach to a damaged bridge. Captain Chu Heron commanded 13 engineering soldiers and 39 civilians. Their convoy had attempted to cross the river after a temporary settlement burned. The bridge deck had collapsed beneath the lead truck. The remaining vehicles were trapped between the brake and a group of infected moving from the north. Heron requested fuel and medical support. She did not ask to join the district. Minjae led the rescue with Jihoon, Minsok, Seoa, Junsok, and 2 construction teams. They reached the bridge through an old service road. Heron's soldiers had built a barricade from military trucks, concrete blocks, and cable. They used disciplined fire, but ammunition was low. Civilians remained beneath the bridge approach, inside maintenance rooms. The collapsed section separated the convoy from the southern ramp. A gap 12 meters wide opened above the river. One lane still hung at an angle, supported by exposed reinforcement bars. The system analyzed the structure. Temporary crossing possible. Required materials: 32 meters of steel beam, 6 cable anchors, 4 vehicle ramps. Minimum construction energy: 24 units. Available energy: 17 units. Minjae could not build the crossing alone. Heron met him behind the barricade. She was 35, tall, and direct. She asked what authority he held. Minjae said he administered a settlement of more than 100 people. Heron asked whether he was military. He said he inspected buildings before the outbreak. She looked at the ruined bridge and told him that it was a poor place to learn engineering. Minjae answered that it was a better place than the first bridge he had inspected. The infected struck the northern barricade before negotiations continued. A howler called from behind a line of abandoned vehicles. Runners climbed over the hoods. Heron soldiers fired in controlled pairs, aiming for heads and knees. Each shot slowed the front, but the noise drew more infected from the riverside park. Minjae divided the problem. Heron's engineers would reinforce the hanging lane manually. His construction teams would dismantle 2 military flatbeds for ramps and beams. Junsok would place drone sirens beneath the western side of the bridge to pull part of the horde away. Jihoon and Minsok would keep a corridor open between the barricade and the maintenance rooms. Seiya would move the wounded first. Heron objected to dismantling military vehicles. They contained fuel and equipment. Minjae showed her the system estimate. The bridge would collapse within 50 minutes under repeated impact from the infected and shifting trucks. The vehicles would be lost with everyone else. Heron studied the cracked deck, then ordered her engineers to cut the flatbeds apart. The work began, under fire. Construction energy could guide and lock finished pieces, but humans had to free them from the trucks. Cutting torches sent sparks across the pavement. 2 soldiers carried steel sections toward the gap. The hanging lane dropped several centimeters when the first anchor took weight. Below, civilians climbed the maintenance stairs in groups of 8. The howler called again. Its sound reached beneath the bridge. Infected emerged from the riverside access tunnel, behind the civilians. Jihoon and Minsok moved to intercept. The tunnel was narrow enough for 2 people. Jihoon used a shield. Minsok used a short axe. They alternated positions every 30 seconds, so neither became trapped by fatigue. The infected pressure increased. One pushed beneath the shield and bit into the leather strap. Jihoon released the handle before the teeth reached his arm. The shield fell. Minsok hooked the infected's neck and pulled it sideways. Jihoon stepped onto its back and drove a steel spike into the skull. A second creature climbed over the body. A third followed. Jihoon used the fallen shield as a low barrier. Minsok struck legs rather than heads, creating a pile that slowed the tunnel. 2 soldiers arrived with a portable hydraulic spreader and closed a damaged maintenance gate halfway. The infected had to crawl beneath it. One person held a hooked pole, dragging each head into view. Another struck from the side. The narrow opening became manageable, but the pile of bodies pressed the gate upward. On the bridge, the first temporary ramp reached across the gap. It was only wide enough for 1 person. The wind moved it. The river showed through open sections between beams. Seiya led the first injured civilian across on a rescue litter. 2 engineers clipped safety lines to the side cable. The bridge shifted beneath them. Minjae saw the northern concrete block pulling free. The anchor had entered cracked material, hidden beneath the surface. He stopped the crossing and ordered everyone back. Heron said the barricade would not last another 20 minutes. Minjae needed a new anchor point. The nearest intact bridge column stood below deck level. Reaching it required someone to descend beneath the broken lane while infected struck the road above. Heron prepared to go herself. One of her engineers had an injured hand. The others were holding the barricade and cable winches. Minjae knew the structural layout and system markings. He clipped into a rope and climbed over the edge. The river wind pulled at his coat. Broken concrete fell when he placed weight on the lane. He descended to the exposed column cap, where old inspection bolts remained beneath rust. The system highlighted 4 bolts capable of sharing the load. He attached the cable plate, but 1 bolt stripped when he tightened it. Above him, a brute reached the northern barricade. It struck a military truck and shifted the vehicle sideways. Soldiers fired into its chest. The creature lowered its head and drove through the gap. Jung-sok sent both siren drones toward the brute. One clipped a cable and crashed. The other hovered beside the creature's face. The brute swatted at it and turned away from the crossing for several seconds. That time allowed Heron's soldiers to wrap a tow cable around its legs. A truck reversed. The cable tightened and pulled the creature onto its side. It tore one leg free before the soldiers could finish it. Minjae installed a replacement anchor using a steel pin cut from the flatbed axle. Temporary crossing integrity, 72%. He climbed back as the brute rose. Heron fired the final round from a heavy rifle into its knee. The joint collapsed. Ji-hoon emerged from the maintenance stairs and drove the hydraulic spreader's jaws around the creature's neck. Min-sok activated the tool. The jaws opened. The neck broke against the bridge rail. The crossing held. Civilians moved south in groups. Soldiers withdrew last, firing only when infected reached the final truck. Heron crossed after setting the vehicle brakes to release. The empty truck rolled backward into the horde and blocked the ramp. 52 people reached the southern side. 4 soldiers were injured. 1 died from a bite before the delay medicine could stop the infection. Heron remained beside him until Seo confirmed there was no chance of treatment. She used her own sidearm before he turned. The convoy came to Shelter Zero for recovery. Heron expected to leave after 2 weeks. She changed her mind after seeing the school, the public ration board, and guards who answered to civilian law. Her soldiers did not surrender their structure. They joined as an engineering and external defense unit under council authority. The population reached 155. With their help, the district restored the bridge approach, built an outer wall, cleared a route to the river, and installed a small hydroelectric turbine in an old flood-controlled channel. By the end of 2033, Shelter Zero produced most of its electricity and more than half of its food. Minjae and Seiya moved into the same small apartment that winter. Their room had 2 metal lockers, a table built from warehouse wood, and a window facing the greenhouse roof. They married in the spring of 2034. Eunmi performed the civil ceremony. Hwayeon prepared noodles, dumplings, and a cake made with powdered milk. Nari played music through the public speakers until Taewon reduced the volume because the Western sensors had detected movement. Minjae spent only 12 minutes looking at the system during the entire day. The district continued to grow through planned admissions, births, and agreements with nearby shelters. A market opened twice a week. Repair teams traded water filters for medicine, cloth, and spare parts. The school added a second classroom. Heijin established animal warning posts outside the walls. Mira created a route ledger that listed travel time, risk, fuel cost, and safe buildings. In 2035, the permanent population reached 181. The system displayed the conditions for stable civilization. Permanent population, 200. Food reserve, 90 days. Independent water and electricity. Internal homicide risk below 5%. Operational school and medical center. Emergency capacity for 50 refugees. Safe travel routes connecting 3 inhabited districts. Public support for administration, above 70%. Most conditions were close. 1 remained dangerous. Shelter Zero still depended on Minjae. When a gate failed, residents waited for his construction command. When the council divided, both sides asked what probability the system displayed. When Minjae left on a mission, the settlement slowed. He began training people to solve problems before he opened the interface. Construction teams prepared standard wall sections that could be raised manually. Council meetings discussed evidence before requesting forecasts. Nari disabled public display of behavioral probabilities. Taewon created emergency plans that assumed the system was unavailable. Minjae's approval rating fell from 84% to 76%. Some residents believed he was withdrawing. Others disliked the council's slower decisions. Eunmi considered the decline healthy. People were judging a government instead of depending on a rescuer. The district was becoming harder to control. It was also becoming harder to destroy by removing one man. The warning reached Shelter Zero in August 2035. Nari received it from 2 radio stations within the same hour. Large fires had spread through southern Seoul after lightning struck an abandoned fuel depot. The heat and smoke forced infected out of districts where they had remained scattered for years. Drone images showed movement along highways, river paths, and subway trenches. The migration was not one horde. It was a chain of groups joining whenever sound or scent pulled them together. Runners moved along the front. Hollows filled the center. Mutated dogs and boars traveled along the edges. At least 6 howlers had been identified. No one could estimate the number accurately. The projected route passed for the industrial basin south of Shelter Zero. The district had 9 days to prepare. Minjae opened the full shelter map in the council chamber. The outer wall could resist small attacks and vehicle impact. It could not withstand thousands of bodies pressing against one section. The strongest defense was geography. An old flood channel ran west of the district. A rail trench ran east. If the migration entered the industrial basin between them, the defenders could divide it. Water from the restored sluice system would push the western portion toward empty warehouses. Sound drones could guide the eastern portion into the rail trench and away from inhabited areas. The central mass would still reach the southern wall. Heron proposed abandoning the farms outside the inner perimeter and concentrating everyone inside the warehouse complex. Ara objected. The outer greenhouses supplied almost a third of the district's food. Losing them before winter would reduce reserves below the 90-day stability requirement and force dangerous supply missions. Taewon said the farms could be rebuilt if people survived. Ara answered that people did not survive winter on plans. Minjae chose a layered withdrawal. Farm crews would remain until the migration entered the basin, then retreat through marked corridors. Security teams would hold the outer wall only long enough for the diversion plan to work. No one would defend an empty structure after the evacuation signal. The system estimated a 64% chance of district survival. The number rose to 71 if the outer farms were abandoned immediately. Food was part of survival, and the greenhouses also narrowed the approach into lanes the defenders understood. Preparation began. Heron's engineers inspected the floodgates. 2 worked. 1 had jammed beneath years of debris. Minsok led a crew into the channel to clear it. Junsok prepared 12 drones. 6 carried sirens. 4 carried heat lamps. 2 carried bags of animal blood and scent material prepared by Heejin. Nari created separate radio channels for defense, medicine, evacuation, and engineering. She installed repeaters beneath concrete roofs to prevent one damaged tower from silencing the district. Taewon distributed ammunition and collected it again after each training shift. He knew a frightened resident could empty a magazine into one target and leave the line helpless. Ji-hoon trained mobile teams to pull isolated infected away from groups, close small breaches, and rescue fallen defenders. Each team carried hooks, shields, bolt cutters, and delay medicine. Seiya expanded the medical hall into the school gym. Songwoo prepared doses of the delay drug. Hwayeon organized water and food for defenders. Eunmi assigned evacuation leaders to every residential block. Mira used her route network to warn nearby settlements. On the 6th day, 46 refugees appeared on the southern camera. They came from a small apartment shelter that had collapsed after its rooftop water tank cracked. Nari had guided them north by radio for 2 days. They carried 5 injured people, 11 children, and almost no food. The migration was less than 48 hours away. The system analyzed the choice. Current permanent population, 181. Refugees awaiting entry, 46. Emergency capacity, 50. Estimated effect on defense efficiency, -18%. Estimated effect on food reserves after registration, -22 days. Estimated infection risk, 3.2% after quarantine. Taewon argued for placing the group in an external factory until the migration passed. The factory had walls and a well. It had no inner gate and lay directly in the projected path. Heron said opening the southern entrance, while scouts were already detecting infected groups, created a military risk. Seiya said 5 refugees would die without treatment. Ji-hoon asked whether the district had built an emergency hall for decoration. Eunmi called for a vote. The result was tied. Under the charter, an immediate admission decision at an active gate belonged to the administrator, with council review afterward. Minjae looked at the camera. The refugees stood in heat and dust outside the same kind of steel barrier where Soa had once begged him to stop the gate. No new module waited at 200 residents. The district already possessed the tools it needed. He opened the quarantine entrance. The refugees entered, in groups of 5. Medical workers checked them. Security searched bags. Children went to the emergency hall. Adults who could stand were offered simple jobs carrying water, sandbags, and medical supplies. 4 refused to rest and joined the preparation crews. One was a welder. Another had repaired pumps. Their skills became important sooner than anyone expected. The migration reached the industrial basin at dawn on the 9th day. The first sign was a line of birds rising from the south. The second was vibration beneath the road. From the roof, Minjae saw infected filling the highway between buildings. The mass moved with no clean front. Runners surged ahead, collided with abandoned cars, and climbed over one another. Hollows followed in thick groups. A brute pushed through the roof of a trapped bus. Mutated boars ran beside the concrete divider, knocking smaller infected into the road. The system's count passed 2,000 and stopped trying to provide a precise number. Junsok launched the first drone wave. 2 sirens moved west toward the flood channel. 2 heat drones moved east above the rail trench. The front of the migration split. Hundreds followed each signal. The central mass continued north. Heron ordered the floodgates opened. 2 gates rose. Water entered the western channel and carried debris toward the industrial basin. The 3rd gate remained shut. Minsok reported that a collapsed delivery container had shifted during the night and jammed the mechanism. Without the 3rd gate, the channel would not carry enough force to redirect the western group. The infected following Junsok's sirens would climb the near bank and reach the district's western wall. Heron sent 6 engineers to the gate. Minsok went with them. The western drone group circled above the channel to buy time. Its sirens drew infected into a growing knot beneath it. Bodies pressed against the concrete slope. Mutated dogs found cracks and began climbing. Minsok's crew reached the gatehouse through a maintenance tunnel. The container had wedged against the lifting arm. Manual controls could not move it. The welder from the refugee group had joined the crew. He cut through one corner while engineers attached a winch cable. The first mutated dog entered the tunnel. Minsok heard claws on concrete and ordered 2 engineers to keep working. He and Harin moved to the tunnel bend. The dog came low and fast. Its jaw had widened until skin split along both sides. Heron fired once and struck the shoulder. The animal rolled, hit the wall, and rose again. Minsok held a hooked pole across the tunnel. The dog struck it and pushed him backward. Heron stepped beside him and drove a short spear behind the front leg. The animal twisted, tearing the spear from her hands. A second dog appeared. Minsok released the pole, let the first animal lunge, and moved sideways. Its claws slipped on the wet floor. He caught the neck with the hook and used the wall as leverage. Heron finished it with a shot through the skull. The second dog leaped over the body. The refugee welder threw a cutting torch into its path. Flames struck the animal's face. It recoiled long enough for an engineer to close a maintenance grill between sections. The grill would not hold for long. The winch pulled. The container shifted 10 centimeters, then stopped. The gate arm had bent around its frame. Minsok climbed onto the mechanism with a hydraulic cutter. Water rose around his boots. The western infected had begun falling into the channel, adding weight and blocking flow. He cut the first section of the arm. The tool jammed. Heron handed him a manual release bar. They worked from opposite sides, bending the damaged metal one movement at a time. The maintenance grill failed. The second dog entered, with 3 runners behind it. 2 engineers formed a line at the gatehouse door. The welder used the cutting torch in short bursts to keep the infected away from the fuel line. One runner reached an engineer and caught his shoulder. Delay medicine could not help after teeth tore into the neck. Heron ordered the door closed. The bitten soldier pushed the others inside and held the outer handle from the tunnel. He told Heron to open the gate. Minsok struck the release bar again. The bent arms snapped. The 3rd floodgate rose. Water hit the container, turned it sideways, and tore it from the channel wall. The current swept infected off their feet. The Western group collapsed into the basin and moved away from Shelter Zero. The soldier outside the gatehouse disappeared beneath the water and bodies. Heron remained at the window for 1 second, then ordered the crew back through the upper ladder. The eastern diversion failed next. A howler called from the highway. Its cry disrupted the drone signals and drew infected away from the rail trench. Junseok increased the siren volume. The howler answered. Each sound pulled the mass in a different direction. One heat drone struck a power line and fell. Another lost control when a mutated crow hit its propeller. The eastern group turned toward District 3, a connected settlement holding 27 people. Nari warned them to evacuate along the safe route to Shelter Zero. The route passed behind the rail depot and crossed an exposed service road. Ji-hoon took 2 mobile teams to hold the crossing. They arrived as the first residents ran from District 3. The howler stood on the roof of a crushed car. Infected spread around it, moving toward every human sound. Ji-hoon could not reach the creature through the crowd. He used the district's training instead of charging. One team placed steel road barriers across the service road. The second opened a maintenance garage and started 3 engines inside. Ji-hoon connected exhaust pipes to a single vent and closed the doors. Noise and heat built behind the metal shutters. The howler turned toward the garage. Ji-hoon waited until the front infected entered the lane, then opened the shutter halfway. Sound poured out. The infected crowded toward the gap. The howler climbed down from the car. Junseok brought the last heat drone low above the lane. The creature followed it into the garage entrance. Ji-hoon dropped from the roof of a delivery kiosk with a cable loop. The loop caught beneath the howler's swollen jaw. 2 residents pulled from the opposite side. The creature screamed. At close range, the sound drove Ji-hoon to one knee. Blood ran from one ear. The cable slipped through his gloves. A runner broke from the crowd and struck him in the back. Ji-hoon rolled beneath the kiosk awning. The runner followed. He trapped its arm between 2 barrier rails and kicked the knee sideways. One of his team finished it with a hammer. The howler tore the cable from one resident's hands and turned toward the evacuation route. Junseok lowered the drone directly in front of its mouth. The howler bit it. The drone battery burst in a shower of sparks. The creature staggered, smoke rising from its throat. Ji-hoon rose, wrapped the cable around a road barrier, and pulled with 3 others. The swollen neck bent against the metal edge. A mobile team member drove a spear through the open mouth. The howler fell. District 3 crossed the service road with 6 minutes to spare. At Shelter Zero, the central migration reached the outer farms. ERA's crews withdrew from the greenhouses. They left irrigation pumps running and opened fertilizer tanks into marked trenches. The smell pulled infected into narrow rows between reinforced frames. Taewon's defenders fired from elevated platforms. They aimed at legs first. Fallen bodies slowed the rows. Spears and hooked poles finished infected that reached the walls. The tactic worked until the first brute entered a greenhouse. It tore through plastic panels, lifted a growing bed, and threw it against the outer wall. Behind them, a mass of hollows pressed through the damaged frame. Taewon ordered the farm line to withdraw. One resident remained on the irrigation platform after a ladder fell. Ara turned back for him. Taewon caught her harness and stopped her from climbing the wall. He called a mobile team instead. The trapped resident jumped onto a hanging water pipe. The pipe bent under his weight. A brute reached toward him. Junseok had no working drones nearby. Ara opened the high-pressure nutrient valve from the control panel. Water and fertilizer struck the brute across the face. It slipped on the flooded floor and crashed through a growing rack. The mobile team extended a rescue ladder over the wall. The resident crawled across as the second brute tore the irrigation platform loose. Everyone cleared the farm. Taewon detonated prepared fuel charges in the empty lanes. Fire moved through the plastic structures and divided the central mass. The greenhouses burned. Ara watched from the inner wall with both hands closed around the control tablet. She had spent 3 years building them. She did not remain at the window. She turned and opened the valves protecting the inner seed storage. The northern half of the horde struck the southern wall. The wall held for 14 minutes. Bodies filled the ditch. More climbed over them. brutes struck the same section repeatedly. Cracks spread through a support column beside the vehicle gate. The system predicted structural failure. Minjae activated the prepared replacement plan. For 2 years, construction teams had stored modular beams, container walls, bus frames, and concrete panels in the central yard. The system could assemble them into a secondary barrier if enough power reached the field. Required construction energy: 28 units. Available: 19. The flood diversion had damaged the hydroelectric intake. Solar output was low, beneath smoke. The district battery reserve powered medicine, communications, and the inner gates. Minjae refused to cut power to the medical hall. He also refused to shut the inner gates while refugees and District 3 residents were still entering. Nari found another source. 3 electric city bus battery packs served as backup power for the school and market. The market pack was already connected to the defense grid. The school pack could be moved if engineers cut through a concrete housing. The third pack was attached to a transport vehicle on the eastern road. Mira took a truck to retrieve the eastern pack. Nari directed the school crew. Hwayeon moved children from the emergency hall before the lights failed. The southern wall split at the base. A brute forced one arm through. Taewon's defenders struck it with spears, but the creature widened the opening. Runners crawled beneath its body. Minjae ordered the final withdrawal to the construction line. The replacement barrier needed 11 minutes after full power connection. Until then, the residents had to hold an open section 80 meters wide. Haerin returned from the floodgate with 7 engineers. Minsok's clothes were soaked and stained with blood that did not belong to him. Jihoon's mobile teams arrived from the eastern crossing. Sea's medical crews placed stretchers behind concrete blocks. Unmi led civilians into the warehouse and counted each group. Hwayeon distributed water at the line because several defenders had forgotten to drink for hours. The 46 refugees did not remain in the emergency hall. Those able to fight carried panels, reloaded magazines, and pulled wounded residents away. The pump repairer joined Nari's power crew. The welder from the floodgate returned with a burned sleeve and helped cut the school battery housing. The first brute entered the yard. Haerin ordered concentrated fire at its damaged leg. Bullets struck the knee. The creature fell, but infected climbed across its back. Jihoon led shields into the gap. The first rank held. The second used spears. The third pulled bodies away with hooks. Pressure bent the shields inward. One defender fell. A runner crossed the line and bit into his forearm. Soa's team dragged him back, injected delay medicine, and applied a tourniquet. The bite lay below the elbow. Songgu prepared for amputation while the battle continued 20 meters away. Another brute struck the right side of the line. Minsok used a forklift to meet it. He lowered the forks and drove into the creature's legs. The brute caught the mast and pushed. The forklift wheels spun on blood and water. Minsok shifted into reverse, drawing the creature forward. Haerin's engineers dropped a bus frame from a crane line behind it. The frame struck the brute's shoulders and trapped it against the forklift. The creature tore one arm free. Minsok left the seat before the hand crushed the cab. He climbed along the forklift arm, reached the hydraulic release, and lowered the mast. The full weight of the bus frame pressed the brute to the ground. Haerin drove a steel pin through the exposed skull with a sledgehammer. The school battery arrived. Power rose to 24 units. 4 short. Mira's truck had not returned from the eastern road. Nari lost radio contact with her near a collapsed overpass. Minjae considered starting a smaller barrier. It would require less power, but it would leave a 20-meter gap beside the warehouse. The system estimated that the gap would fail before residents could close it manually. He waited. The defense line lost ground. Taewon moved ammunition from the western post. That weakened the western gate, where mutated dogs had begun testing the fence. Haejin released controlled scent canisters along the outside wall. The dogs turned toward the stronger trail and followed it into the empty drainage yard. Ara reached the line with farm workers carrying metal irrigation pipes. They placed the pipes through the shield caps and created a second spear rank. The pressure slowed. A howler called from behind the horde. The sound scattered commands, and caused several residents to drop their weapons. More infected surged through the breach. Nari switched every public speaker to a single tone chosen from Songgu's response tests. The tone did not control infected. It interfered with the Howler's call enough that defenders could hear radio instructions again. The speakers burned out one by one. Mira's truck appeared on the eastern camera. Its windshield was broken. One front tire had lost rubber. Infected clung to the cargo frame around the battery pack. Taewon opened the eastern vehicle lock for 6 seconds. Mira drove through at full speed. The outer gate closed on an infected and trapped it at the waist. Guards cleared the truck with hooked poles. The battery connection raised power to 31 units. Minjae activated construction. Pale lines spread across the central yard. Prepared container walls rose from storage racks. Concrete panels slid along guide rails. Steel beams locked into the ground anchors residents had installed months earlier. Estimated completion time: 11 minutes. The construction zone could not distinguish defenders from infected. Everyone had to move behind the marked line before the final sections closed. Minjae ordered a staged retreat. Jihoon's shields moved first, in alternating groups. Heron covered the right side. Taewon controlled the gate opening. Minsok used the surviving forklift to drag the trapped bus frame backward, creating a temporary obstacle. The horde pressed faster. When the defenders moved, a refugee volunteer stumbled while carrying an injured guard. An infected caught both of them. Jihoon returned with 2 shield bearers. They recovered the guard, but the volunteer had already been bitten in the throat. He pushed the others away before more infected reached them. The construction timer showed 7 minutes. The western scent trail failed as rain began. Mutated dogs returned toward the district. Hyejin and Junsok moved to the western gate with the last 2 portable alarms. They attached the alarms to an empty fuel cart and released it down the service slope. The dogs followed. Junsok used a remote winch to pull the cart beyond the outer fence before the signal line broke. The construction timer showed 4 minutes. The howler entered the southern yard. It climbed over the dead brute and called again. The sound disrupted radio communication. At the exact moment, the left shield team began retreating. Half the team moved, half remained. A gap opened between them. Runners entered. Minjae left the control point and crossed the construction zone. He used a manual signal flag from Heron's defense kit because the radios had become useless. Taewon saw the flag and closed the inner formation around the gap. Minjae reached the separated shield team as a runner struck one defender from behind. He drove a construction hammer into its knee, then used a hanging crane cable to pull it sideways. Jihoon finished it. The howler prepared another call. Junsok had no drone. Nari had one device left. The old handheld radio she had stolen during the first month still contained a damaged amplifier. She connected it to the remaining public speaker circuit and sent a burst of feedback through the yard. The howler turned toward the control tower. 2 missed through the moving crowd. The third struck the swollen throat. The creature called again, but the sound broke into a wet hiss. Jihoon and Minjae used the crane cable. They looped it around the howler's chest and attached it to the retreating forklift. Minsok reversed. The cable dragged the creature beneath the descending container wall. The construction timer reached 1 minute. Everyone moved behind the marked line. One engineer remained beside a damaged anchor, holding a locking lever in place. If he released it, the right wall section would tilt and leave a gap. Heron tried to reach him. Infected crossed between them. The engineer locked the lever with his belt and a steel tool. The improvised brace held. He ran toward the line. A runner caught him 3 steps from safety. Heron raised her rifle but had no clear shot. The engineer struck the runner with his helmet and pushed it away from the construction path. A second infected reached him. The wall section descended. Heron saw him disappear on the far side. Construction complete. The final barrier locked into its anchors. Infected struck it from outside. The wall moved less than a centimeter. The yard became quiet enough for the defenders to hear the flood channel and distant fires. The battle had lasted 9 hours. 3 residents and volunteers died during the battle. 23 were injured. 2 bite victims survived amputations. 1 injured resident later died from shock, bringing the total deaths to 4. The greenhouses were damaged, but the seed vault, inner farm, water system, school, and medical center remained operational. The diverted migration continued west and east through empty industrial corridors. Smaller groups remained around the district for weeks, but the main pressure had passed. 7 days later, the refugees completed registration. Permanent population, 223. Food reserve after emergency harvest, 93 days. Independent water and electricity, confirmed. Internal homicide risk, 3.8%. School and medical center, operational. Emergency refugee capacity, 52. Safe routes connecting 3 inhabited districts, confirmed. Public support for administration, 74%. Stable civilization conditions achieved. Minjae read the message in the rebuilt southern yard. Residents were already clearing broken panels and sorting reusable metal. Ara argued with an engineer about greenhouse supports. Taewon collected ammunition. Hwayeon sent anyone who had skipped breakfast toward the kitchen. Nari climbed a ladder to replace a radio cable, while Junsok shouted that the ladder angle was unsafe. The system requested confirmation to rename the settlement. The council had selected 0 district for trade maps and official records. Minjae approved the name. Most residents continued calling it Shelter 0. 1 year after the southern migration, the district contained homes, workshops, a hospital, 2 schools, greenhouses, a public bath, a market, and a small theater built inside the old warehouse office. The theater showed saved films every Saturday. The projector failed often. Nari could repair it faster than anyone, although she complained each time that adults had once accused her of wasting electricity on radios. Subin was 15 and helped teach younger students how to draw evacuation maps. She kept Day 6's old flashlight in the classroom emergency cabinet. Jihoon and Mira lived together near the eastern gate. They had not married. Mira said they would discuss it after Jihoon completed 1 supply mission without returning with a new scar. Heron commanded external defense and bridge maintenance. Taewon directed internal security under the council. The two disagreed over almost every drill and trusted each other during every alarm. Songbu continued his research. His medicine improved, but the virus still had no complete cure. Heijin's warning posts reduced animal attacks across 3 connected districts. Ara rebuilt the outer greenhouses with stronger frames and separate fire lanes. She refused to place all seed reserves in one location again. Seiya directed the hospital. She returned to work gradually after the birth of her daughter. Kang Hanel was almost 1 year old. She had dark hair, strong lungs, and a habit of pulling Minjae's identification card from his jacket whenever he carried her. Minjae no longer attended every council meeting. Construction supervisors handled ordinary repairs from prepared plans. The system still required his confirmation for major projects, but residents usually reached a solution before he opened the interface. On an autumn evening, he carried Hanul to the roof of the old command center. Sewa joined him after her shift. Below them, market lights turned on along the central street. Water moved through the flood channel. Children left the school gym after an emergency drill and complained that the alarm had interrupted a game. Main objective complete. Stable human settlement established. Population 223. Administrator authority can now be reduced to construction access only. Political control transferred fully to the elected council. The system processed the change. Then a new objective appeared. Live well. Minjae closed the interface. Hanul had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Seiya adjusted the blanket around the child's back and reminded him that Hwayeon expected them at dinner. They went downstairs before the food became cold.